Unless you've been living under a rock lately, you're probably aware of the controversy that Republican presidential hopeful Dr. Ben Carson caused when he told Chuck Todd, the moderator of Meet the Press, that he would not advocate electing a Muslim as president of the United States. Dr. Carson has since tried to explain his comments better, but the controversy continues. And one of his key backers, an old friend, we used to talk many, many times back in the old days, conservative commentator, radio host Armstrong Williams, a political commentator nationally syndicated and a business manager for Dr. Ben Carson. He joins me from Washington. Why are you such a strong supporter of the doctor, Armstrong?
I've known him for over 2 decades. I know his character. I understand his hearts. You and I both know his extraordinary career as a world-renowned pediatric neurosurgeon. I know he loves this country. I know this is not something that he wanted to do, but it was as if he were drafted by the American people to run, and that's exactly what he's doing now.
You think he can win the nomination?
You know, Larry, no one knows this better than you because you've covered this for such a lifetime. You know, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. You're going to have some bumps in the road. You know, he certainly does not have the political pedigree and background. It certainly is not his training ground. And so, you know, it's new territory for him. He's constantly learning, constantly adjusting. And, you know, there are a few gaps along the way. And you just sometimes you say things, they come out in certain ways, and it's never your intentions to harm, alienate anyone. But the bottom line is that despite the challenges that Dr. Carson has had as a neophyte to the political process, he's still trailing around second and third in the GOP presidential polls. And this is against someone like a Scott Walker who's dropped out, Mr. Bush, who can't seem to get traction, and Mark Rubio. For some reason, Dr. Carson is one of those outsiders that the voters continue to resonate with.
You mentioned, Armstrong, an occasional gaffe. Was the statement that we can't put a Muslim in charge of a nation he would not advocate, was that a gaffe?
You know, Larry, I'm so glad that you asked that question because you've always been fair and logical in all of your platforms. You know, Dr. Carson was asked a question that he was caught a little off guard by, and they were talking about the state of this country and the state of the world, and Chuck Todd asked him this question, and you could tell that he was really thinking it through. And what he was saying, they did not ask him a question about the Constitution, nor about Article 6. They were very specific. He said as for his personal choice and his preference, he himself could not advocate electing someone as a Muslim for president. You know, it's very painful, Larry, to come to that conclusion when you think about where we are as Americans. We're tolerant. We are a nation of immigrants. When you look at that statue, the Statue of Liberty at Ellis Island in New York, it said, "Bring us your huddle, bring the masses. You're weak and you're strong." And so America has always been a beacon for that. But you know, we live in a situation today in the world where there are people in their heart, like Dr. Carson, who has this fear of Islam. They don't feel that Islam is consistent with the U.S. Constitution. They have no respect for, these extremists have no respect for women. They're willing to behead gays. They beheaded our journalist Daniel Pearlman. We still have the Washington Post journalist in the Iranian prison. And when you see these dastardly, horrific acts around the world, you build this sense of fear. When you hear the word Islam, you hear the name Muslim. So I think what Dr. Carson was speaking to was a certain fear of that when he was overwhelmed by the fact when he said about the White House, but when they asked for further clarification, he said, well, if they reject Sharia law, if they reject the tenets of Islam, which is in conflict with our U.S. Constitution, and if they share our beliefs and our values for this great nation of ours, certainly I can support them.
In 1960, when John Kennedy ran, many thought that I could not vote. People said I couldn't vote for a Catholic because they would answer to the Pope before they would to their country. And Kennedy had to call a whole big conference before Protestant ministers in Houston to answer those charges. If someone said today I couldn't vote for a Jew because he might be more sympathetic to Israel than he was to America, wouldn't you blast both those statements?
You know, it's somewhat difficult, Larry, and I think you understand this, to make the comparison with Catholicism and Judaism, because no one hijacks their faith to the extent where it's so polluted that in the name of Allah, and they say in the name of God, they feel that Americans are infidel. You have the Ayatollah saying death to America, death to Israel. Jews and Christians are kidnapped and beheaded around the world. You have situations where you can build anyone's faith, especially Islam, can come to this country and build mosques without hesitation. But there's nowhere in the Middle East that you can go in these Muslim countries and build Christian churches or build synagogues. So I don't think it's a fair comparison. I think it's understandable for most Americans who are fair and who understand what's going on in the world, that you could sort of in your head conclude that it would be very difficult for you to support someone of that faith as President of the United States. But Dr. Carson has taken a few days since that remark to reflect, because it was never his intention for the little Muslim children growing up in this country to believe that they never can become and aspire as President of the United States. And so he stepped back and realized that he did not mean to mischaracterize or judge an entire faith, and so he sought to clarify what he meant in that question that he was asked.
Because we don't want a theocracy. We could say, I don't want a right-wing Christian fundamentalist to be president, because their value, they believe that the Bible is a higher law than the Constitution. And I would be, and someone could say I'm opposed to that, and that they would be attacked.
You know, and that's a very good point. And it was not an issue of religion and trying to create some theocracy, because Dr. Carson has made it clear that we are a nation that is governed by the rule of law. He would respect that law, and never would his faith get in the way if he's President of the United States. He's made that very clear throughout his campaign. And you sort of can understand the nervousness when it becomes such a huge global story, why people would be nervous and concerned, because we don't want to be anti-anyone, because we don't want to be like people in other parts of the world who discriminate and have hatred against us just because we're Christians and just because we're Jews and just because our sexual preference is different. And so we as Americans must be better than that. And I think Dr. Carson certainly understands that realization. And in my 20 years of knowing him, never, ever has there ever been a hint where Dr. Carson would discriminate, alienate anyone based on their faith. And so this happened. You know, it's a teachable moment, as the president would say. You learn from it and you try to be better. It's particularly as you frame your arguments and your words when you're on the national stage, when you're asked these questions.
All right, no one knows him better than you, Armstrong. So because he's a world-famous neurosurgeon, has a great life story, that's great. It doesn't mean he's going to be a great president. Why would he be? That aside, why would Ben Carson be a great president?
You know, Larry, I think you and I may agree on this. We've had decades and decades of people with the right pedigree to run and become president of the United States. Yes, we have had the governors and the senators, and yes, they've served, and they learn how these legislative bodies work. They learn about how to enact policy and surround themselves with good minds. But yet, the American people don't see in a very big way how it has advanced them, how it has made their lives better. They see gridlock, they see acrimony, they see unemployment, they see Ferguson, they see Baltimore, and they ask, if these leaders have all this pedigree and all this knowledge, why is it that it seems that America is going backwards? And so all of a sudden, you get someone like Dr. Carson, who's soft-spoken, who talks about the fact that there were physicians who were a part of the Founding Fathers. He talks about his love of the Constitution. He talks about America working again for everybody, not for the upper class, but for the middle class and for the poor. When he talks about putting together programs in the inner city and urban America, which really uplifts people and not make them dependent on a government system where they cannot do for themselves, and you create generations of children with the same mentality and the same outcome. when he talks about the fact that when he opens up someone's head as a neurosurgeon, he doesn't see race. All he does is see what makes that person work. And when you talk about his life story, I mean, from poverty and talking about roaches and rats, and his mother, a single mom who was married to someone who was a polygamist, and 21 children, and how they thought he was dumb and could not learn. And yet, all of a sudden, his mother, who could not read, forced them to read these books because she worked in the man's house. And the one thing she could do was borrow those books and teach her children how to read, even though she could never read. And for this man to rise from poverty, to go to Yale and Michigan, and to become a world-class surgeon, that is the American dream. That is the story that all Americans hope for, not only for their children, but for future generations. And so that story and the fact that he's willing to make the sacrifice, the fact that he's willing to learn about foreign policy and find the people that can support him in the areas where he's deficient, the fact that he's willing to sacrifice as an outsider, not someone who's been tainted by inside the Beltway, it resonates in this particular season, sort of like it was some time ago when Ross Perot, he was an outsider, and he had a chance to become president of the United States. And you must find it fascinating that Mr. Perot, Dr. Carson, and Ms. Fiorina are leading the polls as outsiders. That speaks to what the American people are looking for in this election cycle.
Armstrong, good seeing you. Let's not separate time again. Thanks for being with us.
And thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. And again, congratulations.
Thank you. Armstrong Williams, longtime friend. Catch Armstrong on his radio show, The Armstrong Williams Show. It can be heard on Sirius XM's Urban View 126, weekdays, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern.